and or among Buddhists. There are misconceptions and prejudices in Buddhism and among Buddhists. And that is mainly the topic for today's talk. Now, first of all, I would like to mention, and everybody knows most of this, that there are various types or forms of Buddhism. So, for instance, Theravada, Mahayana, and then Vajrayana, the main three streams of Buddhism. Theravada mostly is in Sri Lanka, if not exclusively, although there have been periods of Mahayana in Sri Lanka as well, several times. Then in Thailand, considered to be a very strictly Theravada country, although the 10% of Chinese who live in Thailand, they practice Mahayana. Then Myanmar or Burma, they're so-called Theravada country. Then Laos, Cambodia, Bangladesh, although Bangladesh is mostly nowadays a Muslim country, but about 2% only of the population are Buddhists, and they are Theravada Buddhists. The people living in the hill country of northeastern Bangladesh. And Bangladesh has been as part of Bengal in the long history before Bengal got separated into east and west and so on. You know, Bengal has been a Buddhist country. And now North India also has mostly Theravada, but there are also a lot of Tibetans living in North India, and they are Vajrayana Buddhists, a type of Mahayana, but a special type of Mahayana. And in Nepal, also there are both actually Theravadins and Mahayanists. Actually, when I went to Nepal in 1977 or 76, and I went to a certain monastery, the monk there said, "Oh, I'm expecting a lady professor from the Netherlands. She's going to do a survey on Buddhism, and especially Theravada Buddhism in Nepal, both the monks, that is bhikkhus, and also the nuns. There were no bhikkhunis as such, but the 10 precept mothers who had to get their ordination even not in Nepal, but outside, like from India, because the Rana family, Hindu family, was predominant, and they were basically all Hindus. So anyway, Mahayana Buddhism, which means actually the greater vehicle, because earlier the name for Theravada was the smaller vehicle, and that became seen as a derogatory term, and therefore that term was sort of decided not to use by international Buddhist conferences. They decided to have Theravada instead of what is the other one, the small vehicle. So the Mahayana, the greater vehicle, what is called, or it's called the northern Mahayana. Huh?
Hinayana.
Oh, the Hinayana. Oh, yes, the Hinayana is that small vehicle. Sorry, yeah. That's more or less like a Fiat 500, and the Mahayana is like a Mercedes 650 or something like that. But the Mahayana is then the greater vehicle, and that is practiced in China, Japan, Korea, Mongolia, Siberia, Buryat, you know where that is. Buryat is sort of Siberia. And then Altai, also in that northeastern corner of Asia and former Soviet Union. Tuva, a small state, but Buddhist. And then Kalmykia and Azerbaijan. Those countries also, they were and they still are Buddhist and mostly practicing Mahayana and mostly also the Vajrayana in some of those countries. We had a monk from Altai here in Sri Lanka. He stayed with me, and he was studying, by the way, he had been studying for 10 years in a Buddhist university in South India, not far from Bangalore and Mysore. And there were 4,000 students in that university. And then there's another university closer also to Mysore, where they have another 4,000 students, all studying for, he studied for 10 years there, and there's still more to study. So the studies of Mahayana, and especially of the Tibetan tradition, are very, 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 comprehensive and take long time. His Holiness the Dalai Lama has spent, I think, more than 20 years studying but then there are so many schools within Tibetan Buddhism and so many commentaries also to the original text, what they call the Tanjur, Kanjur. Kanjur is the sutras, and Kanjur. And Tanjur is the commentaries. Many, many, many of those. Anyway, the Vajrayana type, which means actually the diamond way, is mostly practiced in Tibet, in Bhutan, and also in Mongolia. So there are also differences between these teachings, but also the languages which are used. So let's say Theravada Buddhism is mostly going back to the Pali canon, Pali language. All the teachings of the sutras and the Atthakatha are in Pali, and sometimes also translated to the local languages. Whereas the Mahayana have actually translated from Sanskrit into all the local languages. So each Mahayana country has its own language, whereas if you go to Thailand, Burma, etc., the Theravada countries, and you hear the chanting, even though the accent is different, but the language is Pali. So that has been kept for so many centuries, since the beginning, actually. So in a way, we can say, Theravada Buddhism is one of the oldest, maybe the oldest form of Buddhism. Although I just remember in an Austrian Buddhist magazine, I saw an article when I stayed at Sister Kema's center, by the way, Buddha House, that they had found, archaeologists had found gilded leaves, books, not like the Ola leaves, but other kind of leaves made of metal and gold, with texts which were older than the texts here used on the Pali Ola leaf translations, or from Aluvihara, older. So we cannot say that exactly the writings here on the Ola leaves were the oldest written forms of Buddhist texts, in a sense. So But on the other hand, you can say that all these different forms of Buddhism, Theravada, Mahayana, Vajrayana, etc., they have in common, namely that they all believe in the triple gem, Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. Now, when we hear Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, of course, we understand that is Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. But when the Chinese say Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, it is when they take refuge, for instance, I take refuge in Buddha, Kwe I Fo, and then Kwe I Fa, Kwe I Sung. You say, what? But it means the same thing as Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, and taking refuge. So anyway, they have these similar teachings, like they believe in the triple gem, they have the Four Noble Truths, they have the Eightfold Noble Path, the Paticca Samutpada as well, the dependent origination. By the way, His Holiness the Dalai Lama also pronounces Paticca Samutpada, but he pronounces it like almost like whispering and the mouth a little bit closed. I was wondering, why does he do that? Later on, I thought perhaps it is because it is so cold in Tibet, but that's probably not why. But anyway, there are many things that are in common between all these different forms of Buddhism, but then they also have their own variations, which only came in certain countries and which you don't find, for instance, in the Theravada countries. Also, in the Mahayana Buddhism, they have what's called different kinds of Buddhas. Whether they are Buddhas or Bodhisattvas is not always clear, but next to the Sakyamuni Buddha, you find different Bodhisattvas, such as the Amitabha, they say Amitabha Buddha. So the Buddha of infinite life. Ba, it would be Bhasvara or effulgence or light, and then Amita, infinite. The Buddha of infinite light. And that is a very strong, what you call school of Buddhism in Chinese and Vietnamese and in general the Northern Buddhism, where they believe in the existence of the Amitabha Buddha, as if he is living in a kind of world of his own, and that one can attain to reach that world by praying to him, the Amitabha Buddha, and practicing a kind of repetition of the word Amitabha Buddha as a mantra, and then aspire to be reborn in that realm, and also by not only doing the repetition of the mantra, but also the good deeds, to do good deeds in this world. So that is not found in Theravada Buddhism. But by the way, if I say that the Mahayana Buddhists believe that the sort of heaven in which this Amitabha Buddha lives is paved with gold and decorated with diamonds, maybe some ladies might like to go there. Especially the Chinese ladies love to go to Amitabha's world because they love gold and diamonds. So anyway, there's also a Avalokiteshvara. Avalokiteshvara, even in Sri Lanka, if you don't mind, there is a statue of Avalokiteshvara near, what is it, somewhere? Oh dear, I don't remember the name of the town. It's sort of in the southeastern part of Sri Lanka. And during the time of Premadasa, the archaeological department has resurrected the statue of Avalokiteshvara, which had fallen over, and it meant that there was a period in that time where the Mahayana Buddhism was prevalent also in maybe Dawn de Silva can say something about that later on afterwards in the discussion. Yeah. Okay. Yes. So anyway, Avalokiteshvara has different names. Kuan Yin, Kuan Am, Chenrezig. That is the Chenrezig is the Tibetan name. And Tibetans believe that His Holiness the Dalai Lama is an emanation of Chenrezig or the Avalokiteshvara. Avalokiteshvara or Kuan Yin is seen as a kind of a deity who emanates loving kindness and compassion, and is trying to look for the suffering beings and then try to help them in 1,000 ways. You see, some statues have 1,000 arms, 1,000 hands, 1,000 eyes. Anyway, the Mahayana Sutras and the commentaries and the literature is more extensive than that of Theravada, as far as I have understood. If you see, for instance, I saw recently a picture of the woodcut books in Korea, which are forming a gigantic wall, huge wall, like 6 meters tall and so many meters, I don't remember exactly how many meters long, but those are all books chiseled out of wood, and they can be used also for printing books. So the study of the Tibetan, what is called Tanjur and Kanjur, can take 15 to 20 years in the schools and the universities that they have rebuilt after they had to leave Tibet. They were present in Tibet, but now they are mostly in India, and especially in southern India. Nehru gave land and they built beautiful temples and buildings. 4,000 students in one university is not a small thing. One monk actually who is famous, Lama Özal, he was so famous that he managed to, collect money and made a huge fund from which this university can live on and on and on from the interest of that capital money to let 4,000 students live there and pay for everything. So now there is another thing in the Tibetan Buddhism, that is that after the study of the books, the students, the monks and nuns, they have finished their academic studies, let's say, then they are supposed to and obliged to meditate for 3 years, 3 months, and 3 days. 3 years, 3 months, and 3 days. That's a retreat. So they have to do this retreat, and that is like a qualification of their knowledge of Buddhism in the practice of meditation. So now the other thing is that in the 11th century, yes, around the 11th century, there was a monk called Atisha Dipankara Sri Jnana from Bengal. He was from Bengal. There was no East Bengal, West Bengal, just Bengal. And he studied the lineage of what is called the profound action transmitted by Maitreya and Asanga and Vasubandhu, and then the lineage of the profound view transmitted by Manjusri Nagarjuna Chandrakirti, and the lineage of profound experience transmitted by Vajradhara and Tilopa and Naropa. This is all probably like abacadabra to most of you, but those are very famous names in the Tibetan tradition. And what is more important in this sentence, not only the names of the teachers have been preserved, they were very famous, but also what did they teach? Like, the profound action is the first one. Then the profound view, second one. Then the profound experience. So it's not only something like learning, but it's also to get to see and penetrate the view, get the right view, and then also to get the meditative experience. So that is why it's mentioned as three different kind of steps, you could say, in the study. Then they have something which you don't find in other Buddhist traditions, namely Tara. There are 21 Taras, of which the green Tara is one of the most famous ones. She sits with one foot on a lotus, going with the foot forward and ready to step down and into the world, take action like. And then there is the white Tara, the red Tara, and I don't know how they can get to up to 21 different colors, but there are 21 what you call Taras in Tibetan Buddhism. And they seem to have been influenced by Hinduism from the what is called the Hindu tradition, where they had different kinds of deities. But also there's another person, very important one in the Mahayana tradition, that is the laughing Buddha. Some people seem to believe that the laughing Buddha is the same as our Buddha. But that's not true. Laughing Buddha is seen as, actually that's also different, but as the next Buddha, the future Buddha. So our future Buddha looks rather, ascetic with not a big stomach, but the Chinese and the Vietnamese and the Japanese and the Korean, all those laughing Buddhas, they have big, fat stomachs. And they laugh, they are very happy. Sometimes you see them with a lot of children around them, and they are seen as maybe really, how do you say, enjoying life, something that people might aspire to, not such a suffering face as Jesus on the cross or something like that, you see. So, but we don't find this laughing Buddha in Theravada Buddhism. There's also there are some sutras which you don't find in Theravada, but you do find them in Mahayana. For instance, the Heart Sutra, Hridaya Sutra, which has a mantra at the end, Gate, Gate, Paragate, Parasangate, Bodhisvaha. And that is chanted over and over and over and over in the Mahayana monasteries by monks, by nuns, by lay people, as one of the most important sutras. It's not a very long one, but it's quite profound about the emptiness, especially the what is called the sunyata of all the phenomena. So then there is another sutra which is called the Diamond Cutting Sutra. The Diamond Cutting Sutra. In that sutra, which is also not available in Theravada, there is some kind of passage where the practitioner can enter different stages of enlightenment. Like we have in Theravada, for instance, the attainment of, the first stage of enlightenment, the stream entry, then the once return, then the never return, then the arhat. Exactly, those four are also mentioned in that Diamond Cutting Sutra. But these sutras, they are not that they are not Buddhist, but they were not maybe preached by the Buddha himself, but by his disciples. Sometimes maybe by Sariputta or maybe Moggallana or Ananda, different. I don't know exactly which sutra was preached by whom. Then there's a long sutra. Even the name is quite long, the Saddharma Pundarika Sutra, or the Lotus Sutra, which is supposed to have been preached by the Buddha on the top of the Vulture's Peak in Rajgaha. So that is quite a different sutra, but that is being used in the, especially in the Japanese tradition of those, like the Peace Pagoda, the the different stupas, also 5 of them in Sri Lanka, that Fuji Guruji and his disciples have built in different places, including at this, what you call it, the Siripada, and also near Gaul and near Bandarvele, etc. There are the Japanese peace pagodas. They have been built in different parts all over the world, and those were built for peace on earth. And they have actually got this Lotus Sutra in their, what you call, in their vocabulary, and they chant it daily. And in a short form, they chant what is called Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, like that. So then there are some, hope I'm not boring you, but yeah, there is a kind of Buddhist sect, you could call it, a school of Buddhism in Korea. It is called the Won Bulkyo. Won actually means circle. Bulkyo means Buddhism. The Buddhism of the circle. And instead of a Buddha statue, which most of the other forms of Buddhism worship, or they bow for the Buddha, they don't bow for the Buddha, they have this circle, the circle of perfection and the circle of emptiness, they call it. And this was sort of, their teacher from around 1920s had taught certain things that looked so similar to the Buddha's teachings that they made it into a new form of Buddhism. And they do a lot of charity work, actually, that group of Won Bulkyo. They don't wear brown or orange robes, they wear black and white. And the lady nuns, they can grow their hair. The men are shaven, but they all have white on the top and black below. But they feel that they're Buddhists, and they're very good people, very nice. So then we have a very important, what is called Buddhist monument. Buddhist monument in the world, the biggest Buddhist monument in the world is not in Anuradhapura, but it is the Borobudur in Java, in central Java in Indonesia. And that Borobudur Chaitya, or the Borobudur, is the world's largest Buddhist monument. It has about 550 Buddha statues. And those Buddhas are not really they are not what is called our Sakyamuni Buddha, but they have Vairochana in the middle. Then you get circles around it, different layers. And for instance, Akshobhaya and Ratna Sambhava, Amitabha Buddha, Amoghasiddhi in the four directions, and they're all actually bodhisattvas. So we could say that in Mahayana Buddhism, the role of the bodhisattva is very, very important. It's different, but sometimes maybe when we're talking about misunderstandings about, Buddhism, then some people here I've heard saying that in Mahayana, the monks can marry. Is that true, Don? Can the monks marry in... No. Not supposed to, anyway. So, it's not true. And the only thing is that in Japan, about 800 years ago, Nichiren Shoshu, who was living from 1222 till 1282, Nichiren, he, in the Kamakura period, he said it's better to have one pious wife from a special caste rather than have one or more what is called horugehani. I didn't know a better word. So that is the thing. And then the idea that monks can marry in Tibetan Buddhism is also there, but it's also wrong. Namely, in Tibetan Buddhism, there are four kinds of schools. One is called the Nyingma-pa, then the Kargyutpa, the Sakyapa, and the Gelugpa. Gelugpa is the latest, of which His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the first Dalai Lama, was the founder. This is the 14th Dalai Lama. Anyway, in the Tibetan Buddhism, only the first school, that is the Nyingma school, they can have a spiritual consort, what they call. It's more or less like married, they live together, but it is for spiritual reasons. They're like a spiritual female partner. So another misunderstanding is that in Mahayana they can eat at night and they can have meat, which is also false. Well, I mean, in Mahayana they do eat in the night without any fear, but they're strict vegetarians. Chinese and Vietnamese Mahayana, and even some of the Japanese, they're also strict vegetarians. So, well, the idea that they can eat at night, I think the Sri Lankan and, well, I don't know about the other Theravada monks in Burma, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, but whether they eat at night, if you look at their, what is called the neck, the back of the neck, sometimes it looks like they must be eating in the night also. But anyway, I never asked them. So, and what is so bad about eating at night? I think eating at night secretly, which happens, unfortunately, secretly and saying that you don't eat at night, that is worse. It is lying, and it is not good for oneself and for others. But in Tibet, they need to eat meat because Tibet is so cold 9 months of the year, they can't grow any vegetables. And so they have to slaughter some animals. The biggest animal that they can find is the yak. So they have to slaughter the yak, and they do that with great, how do you say, prayers and excuses that they have to do this, and wishes for better rebirth, etc., etc. And then they have to slaughter it, and then they can feed more people from one animal. So in that sense, the Tibetans, they do eat meat, but then when it is summer, like May, June, July, they all eat yogurt and vegetables, the Tibetans. And the Dalai Lama has told now that most of the Tibetans are living outside of Tibet, and there are vegetables and all kinds of things available for eating, which are vegetarian, that the Tibetans should start eating vegetarian as much as possible. So that is it. Now, I have something about a certain school of Buddhism. It is called Chittamatra. And Chittamatra Buddhism is called mind only. Not like the American mind your damn business. No, sorry. But rather mind only school of Buddhism, Chittamatra. And that says mind is the only reality, and matter is just an illusion. But I say, no, matter is real. If you walk into a wall, you get a certain sensation of reality. Even if you close your eyes, it doesn't mean that the wall disappears. So, mind is mind, matter is matter. Mind is not matter, and matter is not mind. Mind does not matter, and matter does not mind. So, never mind, it doesn't matter. And that is, I think, for the moment, my talk, and we can open up for discussion if you like.
Thank you, Bhante. That was quite an very informative and fairly exhaustive presentation. Thank you, Bhante, for all that information. I'm sure there are questions. And as Bhante also mentioned, Don, do you have any questions or comments?
Thank you. I'll wait until some others may be inkling to ask Bhante questions. I've had so many discussions with Bhante, so I'll wait until maybe others may have questions.
Bhante, may I ask, Tara, is she considered a female Buddha?
A female bodhisattva. Now, we have to distinguish between a Buddha and a bodhisattva. So, for instance, the Avalokiteshvara, now that is an interesting point. Like Avalokiteshvara is very often seen as Kuan Yin in the Chinese, Kuan Am in the Vietnamese, and they are a female form, but on the top of their head, they have a small Buddha statue. That means they are aspiring to become a Buddha. They are a bodhisattva, but they hope in one day in the future they will become a Buddha. So in the case of Tara, there you find them in different forms. I'm not quite sure about that Buddha statue on the top of their head, because also in the case of Avalokiteshvara, no, Chenrezig Zig in the Tibetan is a male, whereas the Kuan Yin and Kuan Am, they're females. So in the course of the history, they have what you call changed their sex or whatever in the history.
I may be wrong, but overall, at a glance, the Mahayana countries seem economically much better than the Theravada countries.
Yeah, that could be quite true. Thailand seems to be an exception. Thailand is quite well off. Burma has always remained sort of poor, but of course, even nowadays, the very terrible rulers of Tibet, they don't let anybody become rich except they themselves. Apanabok. Hello, is that Mrs. Panabokka? No.
No, that person has unmuted.
Manouri Senanayake is speaking.
They've not switched off the mic. Panabokka from Kandy, I suppose. Well, maybe Don.
Yes, okay, thank you, Bhante. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your presentation. It's very enlightening as always. I just want to point out that I am extremely grateful for being within the Theravada tradition, because it gives me, as an environmental scientist, purpose and meaning. And I am a little reluctant to go. I do realize, and I have been to nearly almost all the Buddhist countries in the world. And at the same time, I hold on to the teachings of the Buddha in his discourses in the Tipitaka. The 10,000 or so discourses are really enough for me. I have difficulty with some of the other discourses, as I find the language quite flowery. Concerning your reference to the scripts that were found, I think these, you're referring to the Gandhara Buddhist scripts that were found dating to between the 1st and the 3rd century in these gold leaves. Professor Solomon from the University of, I think, Washington, attributed them to the Dhammaguptaka sect. And then these scripts were given to the British library, and then after some time now they have handed them back to the government of Afghanistan. In parallel with that, I'd like to say that I put in quite a bit of focus on the edicts of Emperor Asoka, which are in Prakriti, in the Brahmi script. And Emperor Asoka was predominant between 268 BC and 232 BC. And I'm grateful to his chief global strategist, Moggaliputta Tissatero, for the way in which they were able to sort out the different schools and come up with the teachings of the Buddha, which was then disseminated to many parts of the world. And I think I'm extremely grateful for the fact that these came to Sri Lanka, and we have these teachings there. And when you also compare, and then you go to Zhuangzhang, I'm sure you'll be able to know and speak more about him than I do. The Chinese Buddhist scholar who was in northern India and Nalanda, who copied quite a lot of the manuscripts, and he was around between 625 to 645 BC. The text that he gave, the text that he took back to China, of course, is now being translated, as you know. And there have been several comparative analyses between the Majjhima Nikaya in the Tipitaka and the Chinese Agamas, the Majjhima Agama, which he brought over. And quite a lot of the scholars are of the opinion that the two are more or less sort of like 90 to 95% accurate, according to recent scholars who have made comparative analyses of the two. So you have, as far as I'm concerned, in the Tipitaka, some kind of verification of the teachings, as in the case of other traditions. And I personally hold on to and focus on the teachings of the Buddha in the Tipitaka because they make very clear sense to me. And I find them fascinating, life-changing, and relevant to the world. I do write and I'm active in social media, and I find that when I write, I do get quite a lot of very interesting, and I have a following which is from many parts of the world, from many different schools of thought, but I do always get positive, interesting comments when I touch upon the teachings of the Buddha as in the Theravada tradition. Thank you.
So if I may just ask this Xuanzang, he was, of course, he was from China, but to which tradition do you think he then belonged? Also a kind of Theravada, or sounded like you
It
said?
doesn't say which tradition he belongs to. I suppose after he took the texts to China, various different traditions evolved from that.
Oh yeah.
Following.
There's a very beautiful hall, you know, the Xuanzang Hall. in Nalanda, near Nalanda. Beautiful. That was paid for by the communist government of China in the honor
That is
of
in
Xuanzang.
Nalanda, that is in the ancient archaeological site or in the University of Nalanda?
Yeah, close to the University of Nalanda. It's sort of in between. It's a separate land, quite a big place.
And the other thing to be of interest, if I may just point this out, is that suttacentral.net, of course, now, as you know, have the different versions, traditions of the Buddha's discourses in different versions and traditions as one finds them. So you have, for instance, if you take a discourse in the Majjhima, you have the translation of that in what was taken over by Zhuangzhang, the Chinese version, and other versions that are available. So there is a rich body of information where you can have a comparative analysis of the sutta with the other traditions if they are available.
What's the name of that monk again who is in charge of the
Ajahn Sujato
Sujato, yes.
and Ajahn Brahmali.
Thank you, Don, for that. A few weeks ago, I think 2 months ago, we had a presentation by one of the Buddhist scholars in Sri Lanka, a monk by the name of Bhante Vadinagala Panyaloka. It's on YouTube, about somebody called Anshigao. Is that the same one you meant, Don? Who was said to be the first translator of Buddhist texts to Chinese. And those he shows, this monk who presented, he is conversant with Chinese. He's lived there in Taiwan and China. And it's all on our YouTube. If you look for Anshigao, the first translator, the name of that presentation was, I think, Anshigao, the first translator of Buddhist texts to Chinese. And that's quite amazing. And as you said, it sort of back verifies the Tripitaka, because it's this, he brought it into Chinese from the Pali. And we have Venerable Jnanasiha. Venerable Jnanasiha, nice to see. We can't see you. Can see only your name. If you have any comments or any.
No, I don't have any comments, but I can just remember in 1956, when we had the Buddha Jayanti, there was Okano came and married in called Bishop Okano, and I have visited that place also in Japan. So it could be that the interesting thing he was called Bishop. So, and that's then Mahanayaka Madhya Majjasita Thero also visited that place. So there could be some sects where marriage is possible. So that's the observation from what I have. So whatever it is, it's quite interesting discussion, and also what Don Dissil was mentioning. Then Big Kwanaleo has also done some studies on that, on the Paticcasamuppada, compared with what's there in the Chinese tradition and the and it's so for scholarly studies, it's extremely important, this type of thing. But I think if you are really interested in own salvation, then as Dr. Mr. Don De Silva said, it's different. You have to study and then try to realize and understand the Dhamma and try to go ahead. That's all that I have. So it's quite interesting.
Professor Manouri?
Go ahead, Malkanti.
Right. Picking up from that point, we have, when we look at Buddhism and its evolution, we have the source, which is the word, the discourses of Lord Buddha. That's the source and the authority. And then along the way, we have its dissemination at various historical points. And in this dissemination, we also have the introduction of language and nuances of meaning within a language. When you look at a particular word which was used by Lord Buddha in his discourses. So that's at one level, and it may create a layer, a gloss, a commentary. But there is also what is interesting to me is, does the path, or was the path made easier in as you move eastwards? Because then there is the laity, the lay person who follows or practices it. And some of these changes that took place, came into being. Did they make the follower, the practitioner, make his or her task a little easier? So that, because Theravada Buddhism may appear very austere to some, difficult maybe, did the path become easier in the Mahayana and the other traditions, especially as you move eastwards globally?
Venerable Ananda Mahathero, would you like to answer that? Or Venerable
No,
Jnanasila?
Mahathero doesn't have an answer to that.
I do not wish to comment, but the point is what I am taking. Sometimes there are scholarly, scholarly, what you call interpretations. That's what happens in universities now, much more, and trying to understand it. So these are two paths, as I see it, two paths. One is that you are a scholar. So even take this example, even to the time of the Buddha. And Venerable Ananda is called the Dhammabhandagarika. He knew everything. That means the source of the sources. But he was not able to attain. He attained his Arhanthood just before, on the month of Nikini. So that's actually before the first council. So the thing is, knowledge is one. Understanding, realization of the truth, which is finally what we want in Dhamma, is to finally lead a happy life in this life, and also and I feel that the Buddha was able to lead for 45 years that happy bliss of Nibbana. So because according to Theravada tradition, when you become after Nibbana, that means there is no rebirth. So the point is best that you study the Dhamma, practice the Dhamma, and try to realize the Dhamma so that you can be happy in this life itself. But that's Nibbana. But that's an observation.
Thank you, Bhante. We have 3 questions on chat. May I read them, please? Samantha Jayatilaka asks, is it true a Buddha can never be a female? Or is it that that's one? And the next is a question of what is Zen Buddhism, asks Chaya. Then there is another about that sometimes comparisons of similar suttas across the canonical collections of different traditions or schools helps one gain a richer understanding of the Buddha's comments, as scholars like Analaya, Bhikkhu Analaya has the correction. Scholars like Bhikkhu Analaya does. That's a comment, I believe.
One thing I would say, enlightenment, become an arahant. That means a female also can become an arahant. The Samma Sambuddha is different. We don't know. It's so much, what was mentioned. Why be a Samma Sambuddha? Why can't be an arahant? That means arahanta sometimes, it's enlightenment, it's Buddha. So any female, anyone, gender is not important. Reach the final goal of Nibbana. That it's different to according to what we have, that say in the Samma Sambuddha, that the paramita, upaparamita, paramatta paramita, it's a very strenuous according to what's there in the text. So everybody doesn't want to be a Samma Sambuddha, but I think many would like to be the Buddha. That means, being enlightened and being a Arahant and understanding the Dhamma.
There's a question on Zen Buddhism, a few, Bhante. So actually the question is Zen Buddhism the same as Mahayana, which is obviously not so.
Is it okay if I
Yes, please,
try
Bhante.
to answer that question?
Yes, Bhante.
Yeah, now the word Zen itself comes from the word dhyana or jhana. Then it became Chan in Chinese and Zen in Japanese, and Sun in Korean, actually, all derived from the word Chan in Chinese, and Zen, Dhyana. So it is a kind of Buddhism that is practicing meditation, probably the kind of tranquility meditation or one-pointedness of mind that leads to the absorption of the mind into one particular object and then gets into dhyana. There are different levels of dhyana, first dhyana, second dhyana, third, fourth, and even beyond the what's called the arupa jhanas. So if you practice like that, that has become a kind of school of Buddhism also, with a certain rituals and teachers, lineages, and even different kinds. Also, there is what is called the Soto Zen and the Rinzai Zen, for instance. Soto Zen is just sitting. Basically, they just sit and try to realize something by just sitting. And Soto, and then the other one, Rinzai. That is in Chinese Lin Qi. Lin Qi Fo Chao, that is Rinzai Buddhism. Well, there you also do sitting meditation, but then there is a kind of interview that you have with the Zen master afterwards, and they try to, not to confuse you, but they try to give you a question which cannot be answered with your logical mind. So, for instance, famous example is, what is the sound of one hand clapping? So somebody said, like this, you can, but it doesn't work. And then, what is the name of your parents before they were born? That you can't, unless you go to Ola leaf, astrological place. But anyway, so those are two basic different schools. The Rinzai Zen school with what they call koan, that is the illogical question, and the other one is just sitting, zazen.
Thank you, Bhante. Thank you for that.
Can I just comment on the female Buddha?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
That's a very interesting question. But there is nothing in the Tipitaka which says that there cannot be a female Buddha. That's one. Number two, when it comes to issues concerning gender, first you have to realize the fact that the Buddha took one of the probably historically one of the most revolutionary decisions to enable the establishment of a women's spiritual order that is unparalleled in human history. Thirdly, the Buddha in the texts, alongside, he did audits from time to time of his senior leadership. Then he highlighted 10 foremost monks. Then he highlighted 10 foremost bhikkhunis who were leaders. And it's quite interesting when he talked about Dhammadinna, because he said Dhammadinna had the prowess of speech. And in this sutta, which I think is in Middle Discourses 44, Visakha, the former husband of Dhammadinna, went to see her to test her out and asked a whole series of questions about the Dhamma. Then, having talked to her, he then went and met the Buddha and relayed what answers were given. And the Buddha was quite interested in the answers. And he termed Dhammadinna Pandita Dhammadinna. Mahapanyahoti. He said that the Dhammadinna was a scholar. And if you came to me and asked me the same questions, I would respond to your questions in the same way as Dhammadinna did. These are, I think, path-breaking, radical statements that were made by the Buddha. These are just a few examples. So the Buddha was concerned about a person being, and in one or two of the suttas, he talked about a person being a human being and not necessarily a person that has gender orientation. These are all very path-breaking statements that were made by him. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Thank you. That's great to hear, especially in the current context where there is a lot of gender issues. We can now perhaps end this very, very informative. Thank you, Venerable Olande Ananda, for that really very informative discourse that we listened to today, this Dhamma talk. There was a lot to learn from. And also, I think, a very interesting discussion ensued. Any others? One more last question. No, just saying sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Dr. Terununka, may I make just a comment, a very personal one? It's a lovely, wonderful talk it was. I don't know, it covered so many doubts that I had in my mind. And it was so inspiring. And thank you for presenting a thing like this once more. Thank you.
I think one of the objectives was that within Buddhist sects not to be divided, immediately saying, oh, they are Mahayana, then that can't be right or something, because, travel and things will broaden people, but there are a lot of Buddhists who haven't traveled and who think that there is only this so-called Sinhala Buddhism. I'm sure there is a lot of, we last week had the preserving the sacred island, but a little open-mindedness and understanding that there are so many different sects which have so much commonality is important. And I'm so glad we had this session and that Bhante came up with all that and the common ground, the essence, from the triple gem, and I suppose Anicca Dukkha Anatta also must be there in everyone. So that is great. And I suppose Mahayana does a lot of helping others, that aspect probably is there. I'm not saying that's not there in Theravada, but sometimes that probably is what Malkamti was also seeing. Anyway, thank you very much. I think it has been a very excellent session. Thank you everyone for having joined, and especially the Venerable Sirs. Thank you. And Venerable Olande Ananda. Shall we then end with transferring this merit to the Devas and the departed?
Yes.
Venerable Olande, yes, please.
Akasatta Chibumatta Devanaga Mahindika Punyang Tang Anumoditta Tirang Rakantu Lokasasanang Akasatta Chibumatta Devanaga Mahindika Punyang Tang Anumoditta Tirang Rakantu Desanang Akasatta Chibumatta Devanaga Mahindika Punyang Tang Anumoditta Tirang Rakantu Mang Paranti Ettavata Amhi Sambadang Punya Sampadang Sambe Deva Anumodantu Samba Sampatti Siddhya Ettavata Amhi Sambadang Punya Sampadang Sambe Bhuta Anumodantu Samba Sampatti Siddhya Ettavata Amhi Sambadang Punya Sampadang Sambe Satta Anumodantu Samba Sampatti Siddhya Idang me nyati nang hotu sukita hontu nyatiyo. Idang me nyati nang hotu sukita hontu nyatiyo. Idang me nyati nang hotu sukita hontu nyatiyo.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Venerable Sirs. Much merit to both Theros, our patrons. And can I just mention next week, 24th, the talk is on Facing Death with a Smile by Anuja Vijayasekara. And on the 31st, we have Don De Silva speak to us on leadership in the light of the Buddha Dhamma and principles of good governance as depicted in the Tripitaka, coming at a very opportune time just before the election, because I think he's going to touch on perhaps statecraft as well. So that's on the 31st of August, Saturday. So next week it's Facing Death with a Smile, and then it's about leadership and what the Tripitaka says about good governance, including statecraft. And so with that, let us end this meeting. Once again, much merit to the Bhantes. Thank you, everyone, all Dhamma friends. Thank you. Look forward to seeing you next week. And in the interim, may you be well and happy. Thank you. I will end the meeting then.
Sukhi hotu.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.